There is a particular kind of person who learned, very early, that being fully themselves was a problem. Not a small problem. A problem that made the adults around them sigh, made other kids go quiet, made teachers write the same word on every report card. Too much, too intense, too sensitive. Slow down, tone it down. And so they did. They learned to take the most alive part of themselves and turn the volume down until other people looked comfortable again. And here is the part nobody prepares a child for. That pattern doesn't stop when you grow up. It becomes the way you do everything. This video is about what happens to a high IQ person who was never understood. Not unloved, not abused, just never quite seen for what they actually were. If you recognize yourself in that, this video is going to name some things you've felt for years without the words for. By the end, you'll understand exactly why that childhood pattern is so hard to break, where it actually comes from, and the one twist almost nobody online will tell you. The part that, strangely, is the most freeing thing of all. To understand any of this, you have to start with a single idea that quietly explains the whole experience. In July of 1991, a group of psychologists, educators, and parents met in Columbus, Ohio, and wrote a new definition of what it means to be a gifted child. They didn't define it by test scores. They defined it as something they called asynchronous development. And the idea is deceptively simple. In a gifted child, the mind races ahead while the rest of the child stays on schedule. A 7-year-old can have the reasoning of a 12-year-old, the emotional control of a 7-year-old, and the handwriting of a 5-year-old, all in the same small body on the same Tuesday morning. Picture that from the inside. You can grasp an idea you are nowhere near old enough to cope with. You can see the unfairness in a situation, or the sadness underneath someone's joke, or the fact that everyone you love will one day die, and you can see it years before you have any emotional tools to carry it. The Columbus group used one specific word for children in that state. They called them particularly vulnerable. Not particularly lucky, vulnerable. Because a mind that runs that far ahead of everything around it creates an inner world that, in their words, is qualitatively different from the norm. And a child living in a qualitatively different world has to do something with the gap. Almost always, they learn to hide it. This is where the real damage begins, and it has a name. Psychologists call it masking, and most people who do it have no memory of ever deciding to. Masking is the gifted child quietly editing themselves down to a size the room can accept. It's the kid who already knows the answer, learning to keep their hand down. It's the child who reads the dictionary for fun, learning to never mention that again. Researchers have documented this most clearly in two groups. Bright girls hitting adolescence, who learn that being visibly smart costs them socially, and bright boys in environments where standing out academically gets you punished by your peers. The specifics differ. The move is identical. Make yourself smaller. Make yourself easier. Make yourself blend. The reason this matters so much is that masking is a skill, and skills don't fade. They sharpen. A child who spends a decade translating themselves into a more acceptable version becomes an adult who does it automatically, in every meeting, every date, every dinner with friends, without even noticing they're doing it. They've become fluent in a second language, the language of seeming normal. And they've half forgotten they were ever speaking a first one. The exhaustion this produces is real, and it's specific. It's the tiredness of never quite being in the room as yourself. Now, some of these children were carrying something heavier than intensity, and the gifted education field has a name for it. Some of them weren't only gifted, they also had a genuine difficulty alongside it. A learning disability, a DHD, anxiety, dyslexia. The field calls them twice exceptional, and what happens to them is almost cruel in its symmetry. Their intelligence is powerful enough to compensate for the disability, so the disability stays hidden. And the disability is powerful enough to drag their performance down from brilliant to merely average, so the giftedness stays hidden too. Both halves of the child cancel each other out on paper. The teacher sees an ordinary student who seems strangely frustrated and reaches for the easiest available word, lazy, not applying themselves, not living up to potential. That child walks through their entire education served for nothing they actually are. And this leads to one of the most contested ideas in this whole field, one you've almost certainly heard and one you should hear honestly. The psychologist James Webb, who founded an organization devoted to the emotional needs of gifted children, spent years arguing that gifted kids are routinely misdiagnosed, that their intensity gets labeled as a disorder, their deep focus mistaken for its opposite, their boredom in an unchallenging classroom written up as attention deficit. Webb's distinction was sharp. A child with genuine attention problems struggles to focus almost everywhere. A gifted child in the wrong classroom can focus ferociously on what grips them and simply cannot fake interest in what doesn't. To Webb, those are opposite situations being given the same name. There's a catch here, and it's an important one. Webb's idea comes from decades of clinical experience, not from a large measured study. No one has ever proven how often this misdiagnosis actually happens. And other clinicians push back hard. They warn that a genuinely struggling child can be denied real help if the adults around them wave it away as, oh, they're just gifted. Both of those things are true at once. Some children were pathologized for being intense. Other children had a real condition missed because everyone was dazzled by the intelligence. The misunderstanding cuts in both directions, and that is precisely what makes it a misunderstanding. So what does it actually cost, long-term, to grow up this way? For decades, that question had almost no hard evidence behind it, until an Australian researcher named Miraca Gross did something patient and rare. Starting in 1986, she found 60 children with IQs of 160 or above, a level of intelligence so uncommon it appears in roughly one child in 10,000. And she followed them for more than 20 years into adulthood, and what she found was a fork in the road. The children whose schools had radically adapted to them, moved them ahead, let them work at the speed their minds actually ran, grew into adults who reported strong careers, real friendships, healthy relationships, and genuine satisfaction with their lives. But the children of equal intelligence who were held in place, kept with their age group, told to wait, Gross found something sobering. Years later, as adults, they reported lasting social difficulty, lower self-esteem, a kind of disengagement that had hardened into the structure of who they were. Same raw intelligence, two completely different adult lives. And the variable that separated them was not their minds. It was whether anyone around them had understood what those minds needed. Gross profiled 15 of these children in depth, and she asked each of them one simple question: whether they felt they had ever been allowed to work at the true limit of their ability. Out of 15, exactly one said yes. His name was Terence Tao, and he would go on to become one of the most celebrated mathematicians alive. One child out of 15 got the education his mind was built for. The other 14 were brilliant too. We just never found out what they could have become. This isn't only a modern problem. The most striking example is almost a century old. When the psychologist Lewis Terman launched the first great study of gifted children in the 1920s, his team tested thousands of kids and selected the ones who cleared his IQ threshold. 2 boys were tested and rejected. Their scores weren't high enough. Both of those rejected boys, William Shockley and Luis Alvarez, went on to win the Nobel Prize in Physics. The man who built the most famous instrument for measuring genius used it, and it told him to send genius home. It's the perfect, humbling reminder of how fragile our understanding of a young mind really is, and how easily a real one gets waved past. So here's the part that changes how you carry all of this. The wound of being a misunderstood gifted child is real. The masking is real. The exhaustion is real. The lifelong habit of translating yourself is real. But the popular internet version, the one that says high intelligence itself dooms you to a damaged, lonely, anxious adulthood, is not actually what the strongest evidence shows. Large population studies don't find that intelligent people are simply destined to suffer more. The classic long-term studies found most gifted people grow up reasonably well. The pain was never caused by the intelligence. It was caused by the mismatch, by an environment that couldn't meet the mind it was given. And a mismatch is not a life sentence. A mismatch can be corrected. That distinction changes everything about how you carry this. If the problem were your intelligence, there would be nothing to do but grieve. But if the problem was the gap between a fast mind and a world that moved at a different speed, then what you've been calling brokenness was something much simpler and much kinder. It was a child doing something intelligent. A child who correctly read that the room could not hold all of them and adapted to survive it. That is not damage. That is one of the most resourceful things a young mind can do. The masking worked. It got you here. It simply outlived the danger it was built for. And there's one more thing worth saying plainly, because the researchers who study this now say it openly themselves. Many adults who find this idea, who finally feel understood by the words unrecognized gifted child, discover, looking closer, that the story is bigger than giftedness alone. Sometimes what went unseen was an attention difference, or autism, or anxiety, or a sensitivity no one had language for. I was the misunderstood smart kid can be completely true and still be only part of the picture. And that isn't a disappointment. It's the opposite. It means the goal was never to find the perfect label for an old wound. The goal was to finally be seen accurately, maybe, in some cases, for the first time. Because that was always the real thing being asked for. Not praise, not a higher score, just to be met as what you actually were, at the speed you actually ran, by someone who didn't flinch at the intensity. If you didn't get that as a child, the quiet grief of that is allowed to be real. But the adult you are now can do something the child never could. You can stop translating. You can let one room, one person, one conversation see the unedited version. And notice that the world does not end. The mask was a brilliant solution to a problem that, in most of your life now, no longer exists. If any of this names something you've carried for years without the words for it, take a moment and leave a comment, because someone scrolling past this needs to know they weren't the only one who learned to make themselves smaller. And if you want to keep understanding the quiet patterns that shape the way your mind works, you already know where to find the rest.